The way you interpret effort has a profound impact on your ability to grow from doing hard things. Most people are conditioned to see effort as something negative, a signal that something is wrong or that the task is too difficult. This interpretation creates resistance in the brain, making it more likely that you will avoid challenges or give up when things become uncomfortable. But from a neuroscience perspective, effort itself can be reframed as a positive signal, one that indicates you are in the exact state required for growth and adaptation. At the core of this process is dopamine, a chemical that plays a key role in motivation, learning, and goal-directed behavior. Many people believe dopamine is only released when they achieve a goal or receive a reward. However, the brain can be trained to release dopamine during the process of effort itself. When this shift happens, the experience of working through something difficult becomes intrinsically rewarding, rather than something that needs to be endured. This shift does not happen automatically. It requires a deliberate mental association between effort and reward. For example, when you engage in a challenging task, you can consciously acknowledge the difficulty and interpret it as progress rather than struggle. That internal dialogue matters because it influences how your brain encodes the experience. Instead of labeling the effort as something to escape from, you begin to associate it with improvement and forward movement. Over time, this repeated association begins to rewire neural circuits. The brain starts to predict that effort will lead to a rewarding internal state even before the task is completed. This anticipation increases motivation and reduces the friction that normally appears when starting something difficult. Tasks that once felt overwhelming begin to feel more approachable, not because they have become easier, but because your brain's response to them has changed. There is also an important distinction between external rewards and internal rewards. External rewards such as praise, money, or recognition can be powerful motivators in the short term, but they do not always sustain long-term effort. When motivation depends entirely on outcomes, it creates a pattern where you only feel rewarded at the end of a task. This can make the process feel long and draining, especially when results take time. In contrast, when you learn to derive satisfaction from the act of effort itself, you create a more stable and consistent source of motivation. The process becomes reinforcing, which means you are more likely to return to it again and again. This is particularly important for long-term goals that require sustained work over weeks, months, or even years. Another key aspect of reframing effort is recognizing the biological signals that accompany it. Increased heart rate, mental strain, and even mild frustration are often interpreted as negative experiences. But these signals are actually indicators that your brain and body are actively engaging with a challenge. When you learn to reinterpret these sensations as signs of progress, they lose their negative emotional weight. This shift in perception changes your relationship with difficulty. Instead of asking how to avoid effort, your brain begins to seek it out as a pathway to improvement. The resistance that once prevented action becomes weaker, and the ability to stay engaged with challenging tasks becomes stronger. Over time, effort transforms from something that drains you into something that drives you, for growth requires stress, but not all stress leads to improvement. The key is applying stress in a way that the body and brain can adapt to rather than become overwhelmed by. This concept is often described as controlled or manageable stress, where the level of difficulty is high enough to challenge your current capacity, but not so high that it leads to shutdown or avoidance. When stress is applied in this range, it becomes a powerful signal for adaptation. At the biological level, controlled stress activates systems in the body that are designed to increase performance. When you take on a difficult task, the brain triggers the release of chemicals such as adrenaline and cortisol. These chemicals increase alertness, sharpen focus, and mobilize energy so you can respond effectively to the challenge. In small, temporary doses, this response is beneficial. It prepares both the mind and body to operate at a higher level. The important factor is duration and intensity. If stress is too mild, the body has no reason to change. It stays within its current level of function because there is no demand for improvement. On the other hand, if stress is too intense or prolonged, it can overwhelm the system. This can lead to fatigue, reduced motivation, and even avoidance of future challenges. The optimal zone lies somewhere in between, where the task feels difficult but still achievable with effort. This process is closely tied to a principle known as hormesis. Hormesis refers to the idea that small amounts of stress can strengthen a system, making it more resilient over time. This applies not only to physical training, but also to mental and emotional challenges. When you repeatedly expose yourself to manageable difficulty, your nervous system begins to adapt by increasing its tolerance for stress. One of the most important aspects of controlled stress is repetition. A single exposure to a difficult situation can create some level of adaptation, but lasting change occurs through consistent practice. Each time you engage with a challenging task, you reinforce neural pathways associated with focus, persistence, and problem solving. Over time, these pathways become more efficient, reducing the perceived difficulty of similar tasks in the future. There is also a psychological component to this process. When you successfully navigate controlled stress, your brain records the experience as evidence that you can handle difficulty. This builds confidence in your ability to face future challenges. The next time you encounter something hard, it feels less intimidating because your brain has already learned that discomfort does not necessarily lead to failure. Another important factor is how you enter and exit stressful situations. Gradually increasing the level of challenge allows your system to adapt without becoming overwhelmed. Jumping too quickly into extreme difficulty can trigger a strong stress response that leads to avoidance. By scaling challenges appropriately, you create a steady progression that builds capacity over time. Recovery also plays a crucial role in how the body responds to stress. After a period of challenge, the system needs time to reset and integrate the adaptations that have occurred. Without recovery, stress accumulates and begins to have negative effects. With proper recovery, each exposure to difficulty strengthens the system rather than weakening it. The overall effect of controlled stress is an increase in resilience. Tasks that once felt difficult begin to feel manageable, and your ability to handle uncertainty and pressure improves. The brain and body become more efficient at responding to challenges, allowing you to take on increasingly complex. One of the most important skills for growth is the ability to remain engaged when something feels uncomfortable. Discomfort is often the point where most people stop, not because they have reached their true limit, but because their nervous system is signaling a desire to return to familiarity and ease. Learning to stay in that space where effort feels challenging and resistance is present is what separates temporary effort from long-term adaptation. When you encounter a difficult task, your brain generates internal signals that can include frustration, self-doubt, mental fatigue, or even a desire to distract yourself. These signals are not necessarily indicators that you should stop. Instead, they are part of a protective mechanism designed to conserve energy and avoid uncertainty. The brain is constantly trying to keep you within known patterns, and discomfort represents a departure from those patterns. Training yourself to stay in discomfort involves recognizing these signals without immediately reacting to them. Instead of interpreting discomfort as something negative, you begin to see it as a normal part of the growth process. This shift allows you to remain engaged with the task for longer periods, which is critical for developing new skills and increasing capacity. At the neural level, this process strengthens connections between the prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain involved in emotion and impulse control. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for maintaining focus, making decisions, and guiding behavior toward long-term goals. When you choose to stay engaged despite discomfort, you reinforce the ability of this region to override impulses that push you toward quitting or distraction. Over time, repeated exposure to discomfort reduces its intensity. What once felt overwhelming begins to feel manageable. This does not mean the task itself becomes easy, but rather that your response to it becomes more controlled. The nervous system adapts by lowering the perceived threat associated with difficulty, allowing you to stay focused without as much internal resistance. There is also a strong link between discomfort tolerance and emotional regulation. Many forms of discomfort are not purely physical, but involve emotional responses such as frustration or anxiety. By staying present in these states without immediately trying to escape them, you build the ability to regulate your emotions more effectively. This skill extends beyond specific tasks and influences how you handle stress in other areas of life. Another important aspect is the role of attention. When discomfort arises, the mind often looks for ways to escape, such as checking a phone, switching tasks, or engaging in easier activities. Each time you give in to that impulse, you reinforce a pattern of avoidance. In contrast, when you bring your attention back to the task and continue working, you strengthen the neural circuits associated with sustained focus. Physical practices can also help train this ability. Activities like endurance exercise, cold exposure, or controlled breathing exercises create safe environments where you can experience discomfort and practice staying calm and focused. These experiences translate into greater mental resilience when facing cognitive or emotional challenges. As you build the ability to remain in discomfort, your threshold for what feels difficult begins to shift. Tasks that once triggered a strong urge to quit become part of your normal range of experience. This expands your capacity to take on more demanding challenges and stay engaged long enough to see meaningful progress. The ability to focus deeply without distraction is a critical component of growing from doing hard things. When you engage with a challenging task, the quality of your attention determines how effectively your brain can adapt and improve. Superficial or fragmented attention limits progress, while sustained, focused effort activates the neural mechanisms required for learning, problem solving, and performance enhancement. At the core of this process is the brain's capacity for neuroplasticity, which is its ability to change and reorganize itself based on experience. When you direct your attention fully toward a difficult task, specific neural circuits are activated repeatedly. This repetition strengthens the connections between neurons, making those pathways more efficient over time. In contrast, when your attention is constantly shifting, those circuits do not receive enough consistent activation to produce meaningful change. Distraction is one of the biggest barriers to this process. Modern environments are filled with stimuli designed to capture attention, from notifications to social media to constant streams of information. Each time your attention shifts away from a task, your brain has to reorient itself when you return. This process, often referred to as task switching, reduces efficiency and weakens the depth of engagement required for real progress. Deep focus, on the other hand, allows the brain to enter a state where learning is accelerated. In this state, often associated with deliberate practice, you are fully engaged with the task, aware of errors, and actively trying to improve performance. This level of engagement requires effort because it pushes you to operate at the edge of your current ability. It is not passive repetition, but active refinement. There is also a strong relationship between focus and the perception of difficulty. When attention is scattered, tasks tend to feel more overwhelming because the brain is processing multiple streams of information at once. When attention is concentrated, the task becomes more defined and manageable. This clarity reduces cognitive load and allows you to direct your energy more efficiently. The brain uses certain chemical systems to support focused attention. Neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine increase when you engage in effortful concentration. These chemicals enhance alertness and signal importance, helping you stay locked onto the task. However, these systems function best when distractions are minimized. Constant interruptions disrupt these chemical patterns, making it harder to maintain a consistent level of focus. Training deep focus involves intentionally creating conditions that support sustained attention. This can include setting specific periods of uninterrupted work, removing external distractions, and clearly defining the task at hand. Over time, the brain adapts to these conditions and becomes more efficient at entering a focused state more quickly. There is also a mental component to maintaining focus during difficult tasks. As effort increases, the brain may generate impulses to shift attention towards something easier or more immediately rewarding. Learning to notice these impulses without acting on them is part of building cognitive control. Each time you return your attention to the task, you strengthen the neural circuits involved in focus and discipline. The depth of focus you bring to a task directly influences the rate of improvement. When you are fully engaged, mistakes become more noticeable, adjustments become more precise, and learning becomes more efficient. This is especially important for complex skills that require continuous refinement. As you develop the ability to focus deeply, challenging tasks begin to feel less chaotic and more structured. Your brain becomes better at filtering out irrelevant information and directing resources toward what matters most. This creates a state where effort is not just sustained, but productive, allowing you to extract maximum growth from each experience of doing something hard. Confidence is often misunderstood as something that comes from positive thinking or external validation, but from a biological and psychological perspective, it is built through repeated evidence of capability. Each time you complete a difficult task, your brain records that experience and uses it to update your internal model of what you are capable of doing. This process is what gradually builds a strong sense of self-belief, also known as self-efficacy. When you take on a hard task and follow it through to completion, even if the outcome is not perfect, your brain encodes the effort and the result as proof that you can handle challenge. These experiences accumulate over time, forming a database of evidence that shapes how you approach future difficulties. The more evidence you have, the less uncertainty your brain associates with similar situations. Small wins are particularly powerful because they are repeatable and consistent. Large, infrequent successes can feel motivating, but they do not provide the same steady reinforcement as smaller achievements that occur regularly. When you break down difficult goals into manageable steps and complete them one by one, you create multiple opportunities for the brain to register success. Each completed step sends a signal that reinforces the belief that progress is possible. This process is closely tied to the brain's reward system. When you achieve a goal, even a small one, dopamine is released. This release not only creates a sense of satisfaction, but also strengthens the neural pathways associated with the behavior that led to the success. Over time, this makes it more likely that you will repeat those behaviors, creating a cycle where effort leads to success and success reinforces further effort. There is also an important timing component to how these wins are experienced. When progress is visible and frequent, motivation tends to remain high because the brain continues to receive feedback that the effort is worthwhile. In contrast, when goals are too large or distant, the lack of immediate feedback can reduce motivation and make it harder to stay engaged. This is why structuring tasks in a way that allows for regular progress markers is so effective. Another key factor is how the brain interprets difficulty during these small wins. When a task feels challenging but is ultimately completed, the brain learns that difficulty does not prevent success. This changes the emotional response to future challenges. Instead of associating difficulty with failure, the brain begins to associate it with progress. Tracking progress can further strengthen this effect. When you can see evidence of improvement, whether through written logs, measurable outcomes, or personal reflection, it reinforces the internal narrative that you are capable of growth. This visible record acts as an external extension of your internal memory, making it easier to recall past successes when facing new challenges. Importantly, small wins do not need to be dramatic or impressive. Their value lies in consistency. Completing a focused work session, finishing a workout, or solving a difficult problem all contribute to the accumulation of evidence. Over time, these seemingly minor actions compound into a strong foundation of confidence. As this process continues, your baseline level of self-belief begins to rise. Tasks that once felt intimidating become more approachable because your brain has learned that you can handle similar situations. This shift reduces hesitation and increases the likelihood that you will take on new challenges. The accumulation of small wins gradually transforms your identity. Instead of seeing yourself as someone who struggles with difficulty, you begin to see yourself as someone who can face challenges and make progress. This identity shift reinforces behavior, making it easier to continue engaging with hard things and building further growth. Growth from doing hard things does not occur during the effort alone. It occurs during the period after the effort when the brain and body have the opportunity to adapt, repair, and reorganize. Without proper recovery, the systems that support performance begin to degrade, leading to fatigue, reduced motivation, and decreased ability to handle future challenges. Recovery is not the absence of effort, but an essential part of the process that allows effort to translate into progress. When you engage in a difficult task, whether mental or physical, you are placing stress on neural circuits and physiological systems. This stress creates small disruptions that signal the need for adaptation. In the brain, connections between neurons are activated intensely, and in some cases, temporarily fatigued. In the body, energy stores are depleted, and stress hormones such as cortisol may increase. These changes are necessary to trigger growth, but they cannot remain in that state indefinitely. During recovery, the brain consolidates what was learned during the effort. Neural pathways that were activated repeatedly begin to strengthen, making future performance more efficient. This process is closely tied to sleep, particularly deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep. During these stages, the brain replays patterns of activity, reinforcing useful connections and pruning away less efficient ones. This is how skills become more automatic and less cognitively demanding over time. Sleep also plays a major role in restoring the balance of key neurotransmitters involved in motivation and focus. Chemicals like dopamine and serotonin, which are heavily used during effortful tasks, are replenished during rest. Without adequate recovery, these systems can become depleted, leading to decreased drive and difficulty maintaining attention. This is one reason why consistent high effort without rest often results in burnout rather than growth. Physical recovery follows a similar pattern. After intense activity, the body repairs tissues, replenishes energy stores, and strengthens systems that were challenged. Even in primarily mental tasks, the body is involved through changes in heart rate, breathing, and hormone levels. Recovery allows these systems to return to baseline and prepare for the next bout of effort. Another important aspect of recovery is the shift in the nervous system from a state of activation to a state of restoration. During effort, the sympathetic nervous system is dominant, increasing alertness and energy output. During recovery, the parasympathetic nervous system becomes more active, promoting relaxation, digestion, and repair. This shift is essential for maintaining long-term balance. There is also a psychological component to recovery. Stepping away from a difficult task allows the mind to process information in the background. This often leads to insights or solutions that were not immediately apparent during focused effort. This phenomenon highlights the importance of alternating between periods of intense concentration and periods of rest. Active recovery strategies can enhance this process. Activities such as light movement, time spent outdoors, or practices like controlled breathing can accelerate the transition into a restorative state. These behaviors help regulate stress hormones and support the systems responsible for adaptation. Ignoring recovery disrupts the entire cycle of growth. When effort is applied continuously without rest, performance tends to decline, and the brain begins to associate hard tasks with exhaustion rather than progress. This weakens motivation and increases the likelihood of avoidance. When recovery is prioritized alongside effort, each cycle of challenge leads to a higher baseline of capability. The brain and body become more efficient, more resilient, and better prepared to handle future stress, allowing consistent engagement with increasingly difficult tasks. When effort and recovery are balanced effectively, the process of growth becomes sustainable rather than exhausting. Each challenge is followed by a period of adaptation, allowing the brain and body to come back stronger, more efficient, and better prepared for the next demand. Over time, this cycle builds not only skill and performance, but also resilience and consistency. Instead of burning out or plateauing, you create a rhythm where pushing your limits and restoring your capacity work together, turning hard things into a reliable pathway for continuous growth and long-term progress.